Welcome to another edition of Dogrunner and Branding Random. Today, in our 14 minutes or 14 and below on Fusiontalk, a Branding Random show, we're going to talk about the book called British. It is about racial and national identity in the UK. So, the author is Afua Hirsch, who is British, and her parents are both British. So is her partner, except that she is a mix of Asian and British, or Asian and black. So she's talking about how complicated identity is as a writer for The Guardian. And she asked the question, who am I, or who are you? And as we move through our lives with this racial disunity, exacerbated by riots, each of us carries around a multifaceted answer to that question in minds. And we have our own prejudices. You think of certain nouns or adjectives to describe other people, to describe yourself. And these all make sense after I read this. Think of the stories you tell about your life. For example, a noun about your profession. And one of those stories might be the tale of how we choose our career. And speaking of that, I'm writing an essay that happened to me, how I became stereotyped, and how am I part of a group that was um, a victim of racial discrimination, and that has something to do why I left the Navy early, and why I continue to struggle looking for a job. And so this answers about who you are, who am I, forms our identity when you answer them. And there are ways we can define ourselves as human beings. And these are all from the book. So she says that we are both separate individuals and social creatures. So we're different. And we all see colors, and we have to. And later in the book, which I'll talk about, is that it's wrong to say you don't see color. That's being hypocrite. And we identify on both an individual and social level on how we reflect ourselves. For instance, individually, you might define yourself as having certain personality traits, hobbies, or interests, so that defines you. But socially, you might define yourself as belonging to a certain political party. That's obviously for me, or ethnic group. Maybe I belong to certain. Definitely, I belong to the Filipino, Asian, not so much Hispanic, but I am 40% Spanish. Chinese, I 12 years of my education was in Chinese school. So all of this identities represents the intricate blend of both types of who we become, our characteristics. So this makes identity so complicated phenomenon. And we this riot, this movement that's being bombarded on our media cannot solve this problem. And on top of that, this book talks about the social groups to which we belong also have their own identities and make things even more complex. So why form another identity or another group. Why can't we just be all human beings? Why can't we just all be Americans? Why can't we just limit it to one identity? So, the identity of being, on this case, being British, um, she explored it very well in her point in identifying herself and her parents as being British. But they continuously confronted with a whole set of different questions, especially if you see the riot. The Black Lives Matter global or international has infiltrated London, and they have as much riot as here in the United States. So, what sort of values do we have? And she talks about Brexit, which maybe I skipped that